Hey everyone, welcome back to another College Chaps podcast. Well, as we record this, we are but 7 days from the fat man sliding down the chimney, so that must mean it's time for our Christmas special. But there is much to fit in when we have playoffs happening this weekend. Fear not, we will try to fit both Christmas nonsense and playoff chat into this episode. But first, we are the Chaps. I'm joined by Ollie and Laura. How are you both?
Great. It's
After
great
you,
to be with you
Laura.
guys. And Merry Christmas to everybody.
So you've noticed a familiar voice on this episode. The voice belongs to the fourth chap. Other podcasts have called her a regular on our show, but we don't need any excuse to welcome back someone who has made more appearances on the show than anybody else. Seven, I believe. However, lately this chap is more used to being served tequila by Matthew McConaughey. Yep, it's Laura Rutledge. How are you, Laura?
I am great, you guys. And that is really honestly such an honor. I think I'm going to add that to my bio that I've made the most appearances on this podcast. And don't tell anybody, but you guys are my favorite podcast. So it's only appropriate, only fitting that I would be making the most appearances with you guys. It's great to be with you.
Well, it's too late and we can hide that, but it's out there and it'll probably make its way onto some sort of social media thing.
I
Um,
love it.
right, let's kick off then. It is our Christmas special, so we like to do a little bit of reflection. We like to look back at what happened, and it's been, well, quite an amazing year. Laura, let's start off with you. What's been your highlight of the year so far? And that can be anything. That can be football, that can be professional, that can be whatever. So what's been your highlight so far?
Yeah. Well, I'll pick a football related highlight just because, we like football here, don't we? I loved the SEC championship, and keep in mind I was doing the day in the game with no voice, which was ill-timed, by the way, but what are you going to do? My voice was finally like, girl, you've worked too hard and I'm failing you. But it was so fun to see the grandeur of Georgia and Texas and Texas entering the SEC. And even though they don't win the game, but just seeing what it was like to have Texas fans in Atlanta. We got to see George there as well. So that was also a highlight. But really, I think you see what the strength and the future of this league is with the SEC in having those two teams play. And Georgia, what a win, what a victory to propel them into the playoff. And what a feat to beat Texas twice in a season. You wonder, could we possibly see them play another time for all the marbles, or for a chance to play for all the marbles? We'll have to see how all that shakes out. But I do think that that would be my highlight.
Well, I think it's entirely possible that we get to see them play again, and entirely possible that we get to see them playing again in Atlanta. I think
Mm.
Mercedes-Benz better get used to this. Ollie, what's been your highlight thus far?
I think it's really difficult when you look back across the football season at so many wild events, like singular events. And I think for me, as someone who's watched Conference USA football, to watch Diego Pavia's national emergence for Vanderbilt this year, and having transferred in from New Mexico State, that Vanderbilt beating Alabama as a one single event, I think was about as close to epitomizing what college football is as you'll ever find. And also the whole goalposts in the river thing that now appears to be like if you win a game that you weren't even you were a minor underdog in, it's like, let's get those goalposts in the river, like
Storm the field.
storm the field, goalposts in the river. Like, this is like the standard bearing of college football in 2024. But I think the bigger picture of it is, we spent the whole off season talking about what are the permutations of an expanded college football playoff, and the permutations of conference realignment, and what it was going to do to college football. And I think the best thing I think we can probably all hand on heart say is that this season has been one of the most epic college football seasons we've seen in
Yeah.
recent history. And for that to all come together from a lot of negativity ahead of the season, and there's a lot of negativity still after it, but that's aside, topic for a whole different podcast. Just to see that, to the results, the culmination of everything coming together in the 2024 season, I think was just incredible, absolutely incredible.
It's really added to this season, hasn't it? I mean, there, obviously there's going to be some criticism, but it's really added to what's been happening across this season. We use the word chaos more often than not on this podcast. Ollie, you remind me of the fact that we had Chris Childers on the podcast, and it would have been great podcasting if it had been happening live. But I mean, he was telling us about the podcast about the goalposts going past his window when they were doing it, so it was pretty cool. That kind of takes us on nicely to the playoffs, Laura, and again, there's a lot of excitement about this expanded playoff, and they kick off this weekend. Which of the games are you most looking for? I mean, you're obviously going to be in Austin, I think, if I'm correct, but
Yes.
so
Yes.
there's a lot of excitement this week. Which of the games are you most looking forward to?
Yeah, I just think in general, first of all, guys, I mean, the fact that this first round is hosted on campuses and you're going to get to feel that environment of just the raucous crowd of a crowd that normally would have only experienced something like this in a big regular season game. Now it's for the postseason. Now it's for survival. And you think about the fandom and the craziness that Ollie was talking about that we've seen this season, that's going to be ratcheted up a whole other level. And you're getting these matchups that are just phenomenal. I mean, in Austin, we've got Clemson, who's like a perennial playoff team that I get it. Maybe they haven't been the Clemsons of Dabo's first, few successful years there that everybody would point to a few years ago in the inception of the 14 playoff, but they're still Clemson, and Dabo still knows how to coach a team in these type of environments. They're probably a lot better than maybe we're even giving them credit for. They got to go to Texas, which, having been in Austin earlier this year, that environment is unbelievable, and it'll be even tenfold what it's been before. And you've got this Texas team that there's so much drama to it in having just lost to Georgia and being a team that everyone thought, well, surely they wouldn't lose to Georgia twice. And then they go in the SEC championship, they have an opportunity to make history and they can't pull it off. So I know it sounds biased because that's where I'm going, but that's the game that I'm most excited for. And then my honorable mention would be this Ohio State Tennessee game. What an incredible matchup that is to be able to see these two teams, which are two of the historic college football programs that have just been known as these iconic brand names, now clashing in a new age world where you've got Nico Iamaleava, who we thought, was like this Heisman Trophy contender earlier in the season. He's struggled since, but this Tennessee front that is so difficult to deal with, that D line is just absolutely wreaking havoc against an Ohio State team where Ryan Day is like somehow treading water because he can't beat Michigan. It's just going to be laced with so many different layers of excitement and drama. So I am absolutely so excited about these games in this first round.
And I think the game's been played on campus just adds that additional a dynamic to it, doesn't it? I mean, I couldn't imagine what this game would be like if Ohio State was traveling to Neyland, for example.
Oh yeah.
I think the atmosphere in Columbus will be absolutely awesome. And it's an interesting thing you talk about Clemson, because really one of the benefits of having this expanded playoff system is we didn't know Clemson was in the playoffs until the very last game of the regular season,
Right.
which hasn't happened in forever, frankly. Ollie, what's the game that you're most looking forward to?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for that Ohio State Tennessee game is it seems like today there's a lot of talk about a lot of tickets going to Tennessee fans, and they're going to travel en masse from Tennessee up to Columbus. That makes for a really interesting kind of side story to a game, which I think, as Laura said, is going to be a fascinating game on the field. So that dynamic from a crowd perspective in Columbus on Saturday night as well, that being the last game. It's these two night games for me that I'm really hyped for. So obviously Tennessee, Ohio State's the late game on the Saturday, but Friday night, a cold Friday night in South Bend, Curtis
Ooh,
Rourke
yeah.
against the Notre Dame secondary, a Notre Dame defense that I don't think gets enough credit. And this is very rare for me to talk highly about Notre Dame on this podcast, but I think Notre Dame might be the team that like not enough people are talking about as being a real dangerous component of this college football playoff.
Interesting.
And I think like that's going to be a great game. The fact that those two teams are so close, look at the ticket prices for that game. Like you can still get into Penn State and SMU. You can still get into Ohio State and Tennessee. You can still get into Texas and Clemson. You want to get a ticket to Notre Dame, Indiana on Friday night? That's like $600, $700 to get into that game. So I'm really excited. It's the first one of the first round games as well. And I think there's always that excitement. I love a Friday night game. So I'm really hyped to see what Indiana can do, because they're, I don't think a lot of people are giving them a good chance to pull off a shock in South Bend. But I don't think also enough people are giving Notre Dame enough credit. So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch on Friday night.
So that leads us nicely into the next segment, which is about in a season of college football shocks, and frankly, we've had enough to fill Santa's sack many times over. Do we continue to see these shocks in the playoffs? So, Laura, do you think, can you see, for example, Clemson, shocking Texas? I mean, could we see some more shocks in this round of the playoffs?
I think we'll see at least one. And I would actually point, I agree, Ollie, that I think we've all kind of forgotten about Notre Dame and maybe pushing them aside a little bit too much, or even some people have just sort of shifted that game and said, all right, well, it's going to be Georgia and Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl, right? And dismissing Indiana. You're sort of like seeing both sides of the coin there, where people are dismissing both of those teams in certain ways. And I wouldn't be shocked, even though, again, I think we should be giving Notre Dame more respect, but I kind of feel the same way about Indiana. Indiana's been that team all year long that everybody said, well, their strength of record stinks. They haven't played anybody. And Paul Feinbaum's getting a million calls. They ain't played nobody, Paul, and they're not deserving, and Alabama's better and all that. What if Indiana makes a run? And that would be, I think, one that would be considered a shock, but would be really interesting, especially knowing that you'd be going to the Sugar Bowl, whoever wins that game, facing a Georgia team without Carson Beck. We saw Gunnar Stockton, the heroics as he came into the SEC championship, an incredible spot. You saw the toughness. He got absolutely wrecked by a brutal hit, and he just pops right back up, and he's so talented, but he's still young. So you wonder, could that be anybody's game? I hate to look too far ahead, but I would say, George, I don't think we're getting through this first round without at least one shock, which makes it that much crazier. And imagine being one of the teams that, God forbid, loses at your own place in the first round of the playoffs.
Well, I wouldn't want to be Ryan Day if Tennessee was to win in Columbus, which I think is actually the game where there might be the biggest upset. I know you're married to someone from Alabama, but that was a spookily good Alabama accent that you put on there just now.
I have a lot of experience.
Ollie, where do you think you've focused a lot on that game in South Bend? Where do you think the shock's going to come?
Yeah, I know Laura didn't want to look too far ahead, but I will look too far ahead. I think if you look to the potential permutations of every game this weekend and what they mean for the next round for the quarterfinals, like if I'm Georgia, I don't want to face Notre Dame. I don't want to face Notre Dame's ground game. I don't want to face their defensive front. I don't want to face their secondary. I don't want any part of that if I'm the Georgia Bulldogs, in all honesty. And I know there's the propensity to kind of overlook the Kirby Smart Georgia Bulldogs big game influence in a big game when you look at it purely on a hat on hat as a pure hat on hat battle. But I think Georgia could shock. Notre Dame could shock Georgia in the quarterfinal quite comfortably. I wouldn't want to be right now. I wouldn't want to be any team that has to face Arizona State.
They're hot. Hot right now.
I wouldn't want to be any team that has to face Ashton Genty after his Heisman snub. In all honesty, like there's a lot of subplots when you get to the quarterfinal stage of like, I wouldn't want to face this guy. I wouldn't want to face this team. And I think there could be a surprise this weekend. I certainly think there could be a surprise at the quarterfinal, and then that blows the whole thing wide open. Which the Oregon Ducks will just be laughing about because the best teams in the nation are not going to take down Oregon.
Well, it's going to be interesting, right? Because I know I know from speaking to people at Georgia, they were very glad of the week rest where they get an opportunity to kind of recover from what was a really tough game in Atlanta. Laura, not to gang up on Ollie because we don't do that on this podcast, but you touched on Georgia in their kind of their ability to just get a result, right? We saw that against Georgia State. That went into something of a historic end to that game. And then they didn't go to the same lengths, but they showed the resilience to get, over the line against Texas. Is there something about this Georgia team that propels them towards a national championship when, frankly, most people had them written off after they were beaten by Alabama?
Yeah, I think that it's actually Kirby Smart this year. And in the past, you look back to those Georgia defenses that were all world, that the entire defense gets drafted in the first round a few years ago, and you say, all right, so that was the heartbeat of those teams. And Stetson Bennett in his own way was. And if you look over this Kirby Smart tenure of these championship teams, a lot of times the identity was more with the players. But I think this year it's been Kirby's identity that he has willed upon these players. And even when they were down so big against Alabama, he was fighting. He was constantly pushing them forward. I was on the Alabama sideline for that game, and yet I'm looking across the field and I can see him just actively coaching the entire game. And it's not that other coaches don't do that, but there's something different about the way that he almost instills confidence into his players this year. And I think he's noticed that that was needed for this team. And Carson Beck, certainly has been pretty honest about his own struggles with confidence. And that's been a real point of emphasis for Kirby. So I think that's been, no matter what, like they say it all the time, these dogs just don't quit fighting. And that's scary. You don't really want to go up against Georgia in a big game, like you guys are saying, because they're just too formidable in those moments. They're never out of it. Even when it seems like they are, they find a way. And I know that sounds less about the football and more about the intangibles, but that's real for that team. And I do think that matters when it comes to which teams can really make a run through these playoffs. It also matters that they're getting that first round bye, like you brought up. I mean, I know Texas is pretty beat up too. They wish that they would have gotten that first round bye in a big way. They really felt like they needed it. Sark telling us even before the game how badly they needed it. So that's a real advantage too for a team, even though you wonder, is the time off sometimes too much? But I think especially when you got to make a change at quarterback, it benefits them to have this extra time.
And I think this is interesting, right? This is the first year of the playoffs, but if you look at the NFL, for example, the Patriots' success is built on, getting to that, winning their
Yeah.
conference, getting that time to recover and recuperate, getting a home tie for the next round. I think he's Belichick built a whole legacy on the back of that. So it's not the end of the season; it's the end of the regular season. So we're going to ask you about who your MVP of the season thus far is. Ollie, who's the person that's jumped off the page for you this year? Because I'm sure you've got like 1,000 players that you've been watching over the last few years.
Yeah. How long we got? No, I think in all honesty, it's very difficult to look away from what Ashton Janty has done for Boise State this year.
Yeah.
And I know Travis Hunter won the Heisman. I get why Travis Hunter won the Heisman. But I think if you take Ashton Janty away from the Boise State Broncos, are you looking at a team that is the third seed in the country, a team that is the Mountain West champion? And to me, it goes back to not even in the games where he's got 3 touchdowns or over 200 yards. I've circled back to the first game between Boise State and UNLV when Ashton Janty was absolutely beat up, like injured, and he dragged the Broncos kicking and screaming at what was like 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday morning, a Friday night game here, like kicking and screaming past UNLV, and the UNLV team that was really looking like they were going to give Boise a run for the money in the Mountain West.
Yeah.
If you take him out of that game, and there's no disrespect to anyone else on that Boise State team, because a lot of people forget that Maddox Madsen led the Mountain West in passing touchdowns this year. Yep. So, but you take Ashton Janty out of that team, and that's a very different storyline for Boise State and Spencer Danielson this year. So for me, without a doubt, I think Ashton Janty deserves the MVP. But I give a shout out for a guy who isn't even on the field. Navy offensive coordinator Drew Kronich, who has transformed a
Ooh.
midshipman into one of the most spectacular offensive units in the country from what was a pretty dire situation last season. Like that turnaround, you haven't seen turnarounds like that at many programs this season. So shout out to Drew for that.
What
Love
what
that.
an what an awesome result that was last weekend against Army.
Go Navy.
Absolutely. We're big friends of Navy on this podcast. Laura,
Love it.
I really hope that Ollie hasn't stolen your thunder. I should have let our guest go first. Who's
No,
who's your MVP so far?
this was really hard for me to think about because there's so many options, but I'm going to go with Dan Lanning because I just think what Oregon's done is fantastic. And Ollie mentioned it, like, I don't know who's beating that team, but the reality is we've thought that all year long, and they've continued to show up even when, the other teams that have looked like powerhouses, they've had downturns. They've had moments where they haven't looked as good. To me, Oregon has always looked like such a force to be reckoned with. And I credit coaching to that. It's certainly the play of Dylan Gabriel. The players have been great and they're such a complete team. They're so well assembled. They're so well coached. They're a force to be reckoned with. But I think Lanning deserves a ton of credit. And as much as we talk about, the Kirby Smarts of the world and the Steve Sarkisians of being these great coaches, I think Dan Lanning, we would all agree, is right up there at the top of college football. He made that rise really quickly. And I would just point out, when he was the linebackers coach at Georgia a few years ago, I'll never forget it. I was at a Georgia practice and somebody said, "Hey, watch that guy. He's going to be a big time head coach one day." And sure enough, just a short time later, here he is with a preeminent program in college football. It's really been an impressive rise to watch.
I'm probably going to get caught out here, but in terms of how it all feeds through, but what would you give for a Georgia Oregon national championship game where
Woo!
you've got Dan Lanning up against Kirby Smart?
So good.
That would be a little interesting. Right, okay, it is our Christmas special. We haven't talked near enough about the fat man in the red suit, so we're going to be Secret Santa. Laura, who would be your ideal college football Secret Santa? And what would be your gift to that person?
So this one, there's so many people. I would like to give a gift to like everybody in college football because I love college football, but I chose Marty Smith, who you guys know well. And this has a little layer of comedy to it because Marty is a very stylish guy and he dresses well, he cares what he looks like and all that. So I think it'd be so funny to give Marty something that I acted like I thought was really an attractive thing. So I'm going to say a sweater, but it's hideous. And he has to act like he likes it because he's such a nice guy and he's such a dear friend. I think he would be like, "Oh, thank you. That's so nice." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's going to look great on you." And then it's obviously ugly and he's stuck wearing it or like too baggy or something. He likes things to be a little tighter to show off that figure. But so I'm choosing Marty and I'm giving him something really ugly and he has to think that I think it looks great and he has to be very thankful for it.
The and one which would clearly clash with his Jordans, right? Because
Yeah.
that would be the ultimate
Oh,
disaster
he'd
for him.
be
Something
he'd be
which
sick.
do you
Yeah.
tell me something you're giving away? Do you do Secret Santa at ESPN? Have you got a little Secret Santa going around the office?
So we have done that before. We have not done it this year, but I think you might be inspiring me to bring it back. Maybe I should send out an emergency message to the SEC Nation crew heading to Austin this week and say, "Guys, we're doing Secret Santa," and it would be hilarious to see what people would give. I can only imagine.
You've got time, right? It's only what is this Tuesday?
Absolutely.
I've lost
It's
track of time.
Tuesday.
I think it's
We
pretty.
leave we Most of us get there on Thursday night, so we have plenty of time. We could totally do it.
I tell you. Ollie, what's your Secret Santa gift going to be? Who's it to?
Honestly, all I can think of right now is getting our podcast creative department, which is basically just George, to put together a college chap's ugly sweater, which would have like our oversized logo in the middle of it.
Yes.
And then every single guest that we've had on the podcast in our 201 episodes, they're like Twitter bio picture in like woven patches all over this
I like
sweater.
this.
I think we make just like the greatest gift for Marty Smith.
Coming to an inbox near you.
He'd be like, thanks.
But if I was doing Secret Santa, a college football Secret Santa, I would go with Dabo Swinney,
Mm.
and I would cheekily get him the Dummy's Guide to the College Football Transfer Portal,
Ah!
which probably hasn't been written yet. I don't know if Dummy's Guide do a lot of things. I don't think there's one to the transfer portal yet, so we might have to write that for him. Get him a copy of that, and just see if they can win a national championship next year using the portal.
Clemson fans would thank you for that gift. They would say, "Yep."
They signed an FCS wide receiver out of the portal this week and absolutely lost their minds.
I was going to say, I'm sure I saw somewhere that they had dabbled. Did you get that?
Very good, George.
Dabbled.
I can see George has been in the pub this afternoon. Yeah. So maybe this is. I don't even need to get him that gift now. He's a seasoned professional with his one transfer portal signing in 16 years of being a head coach.
Maybe someone's already given him the Dummy's Guide. Anyway, that's
it happens at Christmas, doesn't it? Right? Like double gifting.
It's a Christmas miracle. Right, that's all from us on this episode. Laura's probably going to get charged excess parking charges for sitting in the car park.
My ghost stories with the college chaps in the car, spooky season.
So this episode, the lights are not going out in the studio. This episode is the security guards escorting you off the car park. That's all from us on this episode. As always, it's been awesome to catch up with Laura. So you've touched on the fact that you're off to Austin. Tell our listeners what you're up to and where we can catch you over the next little while.
Yeah, so we'll be doing SEC Nation live from Austin. It's the first time ever that an SEC team has hosted a playoff game. So really cool. It's going to be historic for us to be there. And then I will do the game and I'll be on Texas's sideline. So cannot wait for another opportunity to do more college football. And I'll see you guys there.
And if I'm right, Marty McGee are not in Austin, Texas.
They're in Columbus.
They're in Columbus.
Yes. So we split up so that we have presence at both of the sites for the SEC teams that are in this first round.
I'm picturing the start of that show where they're both wearing these massive
fur
coats, and yeah,
so
it's
cool.
going to be. Thank you, Laura. If you enjoyed this episode, why don't you catch up on our previous episodes on Apple and YouTube? Please subscribe and follow us on social media. That's a new thing, right? So we're on YouTube since the last time we spoke to you.
Let's go.
Thanks to Laura and Ollie for their excellent insight. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.
Thank you, guys.